So how does it actually work? And if you could describe the various work streams, I know there are over 200 work streams that are going on, and how you manage to really, um, really keep track of all of these like a conductor of an orchestra. How does it actually work, and therefore what should we be expecting in terms of outcomes?
So you have the Sherpa track where there are 13 working groups. You have the finance track where there are 8 finance track meetings. There are 16 ministerials. And you have a vast number of engagement groups like Business 20, Startup 20, etc. All their recommendations finally come to the Sherpas, who act like the envoy to their leaders. And they're called Sherpas because they are supposed to take the leaders up to the Mount Everest, on the peak of the Mount Everest. And therefore their job is to do a lot of discussions and bring in consensus on a range of issues. And that is critical. In Bali, we had seen 17 meetings fail, one after another, 17 ministerial meetings fail. No communique came out, but in the end, the Sherpas sat together and built a consensus and came out with an agreement. The challenge is that this is not a political forum. This is a forum for economic growth. This is a forum for development. This is a forum for economic growth. But the argument of G7 is that the present war is having a huge implication on economic issues. It is having an economic implication of rising gas prices, 3x, 4x in Germany, in Europe. It has a huge implication on fertilizer not being transported, which will impact food productivity of tomorrow. And you're not able to lift food from Ukraine, and therefore people's lives are getting impacted, and therefore the war has economic implications. And therefore in Bali we structured it out by using one of the UN, the political body is the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. In the post-World War II era, when the United Nations were constituted, the veto power was given to 5 countries. It was never envisaged that one of those countries will go to the war and bring the entire Security Council to a standstill. And therefore, this structure, the United Nations with 186 countries, has become very unwieldy, whereas the G20 is a tight, compact body, and as you said, comprises of 85% of the global GDP. And it comprises of both developed and emerging markets. And therefore, their job is to bring a consensus around issues and then ask IMF, World Bank, Financial Stability Board, WTO, all to implement what they've decided. The implementing arms are these bodies, but the policy making is by the G20, by consensus. And therefore, the challenge is to bring consensus all around and to ensure that everybody is a party. And that is why a number of meetings are held throughout the year. So India will host about 215 meetings in 56 cities. And this is an opportunity to clean up your cities, transform the cities, ask the states to put their brands forward, do a lot of cultural marketing, do their one district, one product, etc. This is a huge, huge opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for India to transform 56 cities of India.
No, we can see that. And when you were in Mumbai, we saw how pretty the city looked after a very long time. So thank you for that. Speaking of the Ukraine war, the West has been a bit critical about India for having a neutral stand on the war. And I think the Western expectation was that we would be really more forceful in terms of its stand against Russia. But we're looking at it from an Indian lens sitting in this part of the world. I think we looked after our interests and probably took a stand of remaining neutral was probably the best way forward in our interests. Now that being said, I think, is there an opportunity for for India as a part of the G20 and using its soft power? But one of the things which India is kind of famous for is its soft power and influence, to actually be a part of the solution eventually as well. Because if you are neutral, it also means that both sides will talk to you. and that you would have moral authority on both sides of the equation. What do you see as India's opportunity, both on a standalone basis as well as a part of the G20, to really find a solution to this very tricky problem?
So that's an important question. And, we saw this dilemma in the finance minister central bank governors meeting. We saw this in the foreign ministers meeting. And our challenge is that get the development agenda out, get consensus out on all these issues. So in the finance ministers meeting, we could get a consensus out on all the developmental issues.
Except those two paragraphs.
Except the two paras where India had played a key role in Bali. India played a transformational role in Bali by working with the emerging markets to arrive at a solution in Bali. And we'd helped Indonesia to arrive at a solution by drafting para 3 and 4. And because our argument was that this is not a political body. The political body is the UN General Assembly, and we'd taken parts of the UN General Assembly resolution, including its voting pattern, and then put it onto the G20. And we'd found a solution. Now, Russia's argument is that much has transpired since Bali, and actually you've had a new UN resolution, and you had a war going on in Ukraine. And their argument was that you need to change the para 3 and 4. We didn't want to open it up because stitching it back together would be a challenge. And therefore, much like we'd helped Bali, in Bali we'd helped Indonesia. I think as we go along, it's very difficult to arrive at solutions in ministerial meetings, but as we go along, we'll try and get all the developmental agenda out, and we'll then push for consensus. Our objective will be to push for consensus. Our objective is to be neutral. Our objective is to bring everybody along. Our objective is that this is G20, and everybody needs to work together. You can't leave Russia, China out from the consensus-making process. If you do that, global debt will not find a solution. If you do that, then there'll be challenges on a vast range of other issues. And therefore, G20 has been constituted of both emerging and developed world. Tomorrow, if there's a debt crisis, if China is not a party to it, or global debt issue where China is not a party to it, it'll be very difficult. We are so dependent on each other in terms of the global supply chains, in terms of being an integral part of a global value chain, that you need to bring everybody together and push for change. And that is what we'll keep striving for.
In fact, therefore, our neutrality would finally be our USP.
Absolutely, you are very right. Our objective should be to work with all emerging markets, all developed markets, all G7, as well as China and Russia, and bring everybody around. And I'm absolutely confident, I'm optimistic, I'm positive that we'll be able to do that.
No, that's great, and I think that's sort of gives a lot of comfort in terms of the direction that we're taking. You spoke of debt. And I think the part of the problem today in the world is sort of excessive debt, particularly in the global south. There's been criticism that China sort of doled out a lot of usurious debt, companies going into sovereign debt crisis as well. What role can India play in really effectively negotiating a global restructuring of sovereign debt? And in that sense, it's basically largely directed against China, but the G20 can play a role. And especially since you raised the topic, what role would that conversation have in the agenda for G20?
So in the finance ministers meeting in Bangalore, we could arrive at an agreement on global debt after a lot of hard work with China. The challenge, as you'd see, is that most of the debt in the earlier period was given by what is known as the Paris Club. And a lot of lending had been done by them. But since then, there has been lending by IMF, there's been lending by private sources, and then on top of that, in recent times, China has done a lot of lending to a vast range of countries. Much of this lending by China has been non-transparent, it has been opaque, so people are not aware of the extent of lending. Even the recipient countries in several cases are not aware. In several cases, it's been said that it will not even be brought
They've been
before.
given at sub-sovereign level and
Yeah, yeah. So the challenge is that IMF, suppose it's arriving at a package without bringing China on board, their package cannot go to serve the lending done by IMF. Everybody has to sit together. The Paris Club, the private sector, countries like India which have done development.
Multilaterals as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And then arrive at a package. And that is what we've been telling China, that you cannot and should not be out of this package. You have to be a part of this whole deal. And that is what we've managed to
I
do
think
to
it's very
convince.
important in our part of the world also because two of our neighbors are having a deep sovereign debt crisis, and I think they're
Not just your neighbors, there's 75 countries in the world, from Zimbabwe to
I mean neighbors because it
Ethiopia.
has a very direct impact
Yeah,
on
yeah,
us in
yeah.
terms in both our western and
Yeah.
our southern
So
borders.
if imagine if 3 or 4 countries, their financial architecture starts falling apart, the global financial architecture will fall apart. And that will be very difficult to put it back together. So you need to set this right at the earliest. That is what we are striving for. And hopefully we should be able to find a solution during India's presidency.
So you have got your work cut out for the next 9 months for sure.
All very tough work.
Yeah, all tough work. And even if you're not able to solve everything, at least we can put the world on a journey that it will eventually get solved in a couple of years. Now let me shift gear a bit and come to one of your favorite topics on digital India and the digital. You kind of adverted to some of this already. But one of the problems on this whole topic of data and digital globally is that it's really moving in the opposite direction that it should be in terms of different countries evolving different standards, lack of a common code. What role can the G20 play in really achieving and putting the world in a direction of uniform standards? Because otherwise, we are a lot of the development opportunity that comes from the fourth industrial revolution would really be very localized, and you won't get the full benefit of it. So, what are your thoughts, especially given where India is, where we've got this great digital public infrastructure? We are probably the global leaders on most of these things, like whether it's the payment systems thanks to UPI, the India stack, etc., and just the opportunity to innovate more than any other market in the world. But taking that as a base, how do we develop it into using the G20 moment to drive international standards across the world? It could mean many things. It could mean data protection. It could mean cyber security. There's a whole bunch of stuff which and are we going to do that?
So let me touch upon 2 or 3 key issues. So if you look at the last 2.5 decades, most of the digital innovation, most of the transformation in the world and the advancement in the world that has happened is because of big tech. It's happened because of Google, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, and in the case of China, because of Tencent and Alibaba. But all these companies own the data of the citizens and actually use that for purposes of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So the parts of the world had a big tech model which was privately driven, and you had the GDPR model in Europe which focused on privacy of data for the citizens, but at the cost of innovation. So you've not had great innovation coming out of Europe in the last 2.5 decades. Europe has not made technological breakthroughs.
They've been followers, really.
Yeah, they've been. In sharp contrast to this, India has done something unparalleled and unprecedented. And for the first time in the world, major digital and transformational breakthroughs have come from an emerging market. And that is because in India, we created the JAM Trinity. So we ensured that every individual had a digital identity, which is provided by the government, the public. Between 2015 and 17, we opened up 500 million bank accounts. And that means that 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world were opened in India. And every second bank account during that period was opened in India. And then we embedded the mobile number and the digital identity into the bank account, and therefore, for the last 3 to 4 years, I have not used my debit card, credit card, I have not been to a bank account, I have not been to a physical bank, I have not been to an ATM machine. I mean, this is my bank. This mobile is my virtual bank through which I do my debit, credit. It's linked to my bank account and it's linked to my digital identity. And that is why we've been able to do direct debit credit, and that's why we do 11x more payments than what Europe and USA does, and we do 4x more than China. But we've created similar digital public infrastructure in vaccination, Diksha and Swam, in education,
Now
DigiLocker.
ONDC coming up now.
Yeah, ONDC in e-commerce. Now, the Bank of International Settlement has said that what India has achieved in 7 years is actually 50 years of progress. Because during the COVID period, we were able to provide direct benefit transfer to over 480 million people directly into the bank account. And the government transfers now money of 600 schemes. 600 government schemes, we put money straight into the bank accounts without any leakage whatsoever. It's very unlike when I started off my career where money used to be transferred from central government to state government to districts, and 80% of it was leakage. Today, not a single paisa is lost. It goes straight into the bank accounts and he takes it out. The beneficiary gets it. So what India has demonstrated is a unique model. And that is a model because you've allowed private sector to compete. PhonePe competes with Google Pay, WhatsApp competes with this, with Paytm. So 40 apps are competing and innovation is taking place because it's open source and open API with interoperability. Now, this model which India has built up is unprecedented. And this is the model which needs to be taken across the world.
That was my question. How do we kind of universalize?
So 2 ways. One is what the IIIT Bangalore has done is they created this modular platform called MOSIP, by which any country can adopt it to do the digital identity. Secondly, every country, if 133 countries do not have a digital identity, they need a digital identity. In India, it was very heavily discussed, debated. It went up.
I think we've taken a baby step with the Singapore thing.
Yeah. So payments we've taken, we'll do it with many countries.
Yes,
And I think but the challenge is not with Singapore. The challenge is not with the developed world. The challenge is to transform lives in the global south.
Yes.
So what India has done to 1.3 billion people should be used for the next 4.5 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class now. And that is where we need to put this into a cloud, in a box, and then use it to transform lives in the global south.
So this is actually one of our biggest opportunities, both as G20 and India's role in it.
So my view on that is, Cyrill, that we should, because we've shown that we can do things to population size and scale at low cost. And therefore, you need to put this into the hands.
Like even COVID, the example that you gave, I think COVID was an amazing invention.
Exactly. So you need to put this into the hands of India's private sector.
I remember when we were taking vaccine, before you were even out of the clinic, it's on your phone that you've been vaccinated and this. And I have a cousin in the US and they hadn't got their certificate for 3 days.
Yeah. Because there it was all paperwork.
Yes.
So, my daughter...
And then in that also it would be a piece of paper which could be sort of made by anyone, whereas this was authentic with a QR code. It's incredible.
So India's done path-breaking work. And we need to make... So if 4 billion people do not have an identity and 2.5 billion people in the world do not have bank accounts, that is where we must take India's innovation too.
Yes. This is a gathering of many private lawyers. So any ideas from you in terms of how can private lawyers like us really engage with the G20 and contribute to this? Because at one level, it's a very abstract, government to government thing, very high funda, very difficult to understand. But we want to contribute in a small way as well. What can we do?
So let me know your interests, a vast range of areas. We work around issue notes which we've prepared. We've prepared about 40 to 50 issue notes. We look for good intellectual content. There's nobody who's a better intellectual person than a great lawyer. And we like issues which can be framed very precisely. We'd be very happy to work with good lawyers to assist us,
So I think
support
that's
us.
an open invitation
And
for this group.
especially young
A lot of
lawyers.
young students as well. So you all have all been recruited to the cause.
Yeah. Forget your law for 1 year, come and work with G20
No,
secretary.
you can't make recruitment pitches.
Problem is lawyers are too busy making money.
Not as much as you think.
Yeah.
So let me now move to the second. So this was the first theme. I think I sort of captured a lot of what I wanted to ask you for. Now let me move to the rule of law topic. And I know this has been something very dear to your heart. I know you spent a lot of time on enforcement of contracts, and then we did a couple of projects on ODR as well. So it's a very critical part of a country's infrastructure, and even from a G20 perspective, for each country's infrastructure to have a stable legal system, enforcement of contracts, and things like that. And a multilateral body like G20 can really play a big role in terms of promoting the rule of law, both with structural reform, whether it's faster dispute resolution, innovation as well. What are your thoughts in terms of this item of your agenda? I know you've got many things to worry about in G20, but I don't want you to lose sight of the rule of law topic.
No, so, the most important thing, as I said, is about accelerating the pace of growth. And accelerating the pace of growth in the global economy means that we, as a world, we have to make our global supply chains more resilient. We need to demonopolize our global supply chains because many of them have got, especially the American companies, their dependency on one country is over about 90% of the top companies. And that would mean that would not happen unless other countries become very productively efficient. And that would mean that there is a need for them to become very easy. They need to become...
So that is happening.
That is ease of doing business. There has to be a rule of law.
China plus one, China plus two thing is kind of already on
Yeah,
its way.
but for that to happen, China plus one will happen. China plus two may happen. But a lot of investment which is already in China will never move out unless and until other destinations with size and scale do not become very productively efficient. And productively efficient means that your rule of law has to be top class. It can't be that you don't have exit provisions, you don't have your IBC working efficiently, you don't have NCLAT not being staffed, you don't have men of integrity and efficiency. All this is very critical. And you don't have ease of doing business. You need very ruthless implementation on all these issues. And you'll attract vast amount of investments if all this is put into framework. And therefore, efficiency, speed, digitization, ease of doing business, your ability to exit when you are going bust, or your ability to ensure that your insolvency code is working and the appeal mechanism there is working efficiently are all, and online dispute resolutions in the case of e-commerce are very, very critical to my mind. And they are key issues on which, while the law is being promulgated, the provisions of it in terms of the period, time span within which you are working, all this is very critical to my mind.
No, and this is music to my ears, and I know I think you're one of the few civil servants who recognizes the importance of this as, being so integral to growth. So more power to you, and I hope that you can also make it a part of the G20 agenda as well, because if it is in a more multilateral context, I think it has a better chance of success. My last topic now is in terms of regulation, and it's regulation and standards as well. I think there's an opportunity at a multilateral level like G20 to bring about common regulatory and like, for example, even in the energy transition, there is so much that is dependent on policy and regulation. Just take even hydrogen, for example, or blue carbon, or so many of these new innovations that have to come. and nobody has a clue. I mean, we're working for a number of clients, but we are all, to be honest, I think we are all clueless in terms of what are the standards, and if you're working in a multi-jurisdiction context, there is just so much confusion. I think a body like the G20 can at least start the dialogue and create a platform for arriving at a common conversation and creating kind of universal standards on these new areas, which I don't think any country on its own can really develop and perfect by itself, unlike a lot of other things. So how would you use your presidency of the G20 to at least get this moving?
No, it's a very, very important question. And I think you've raised a very important issue. And let me, for instance, just touch upon energy transition. And it's important because even if we do 100% of our electricity through renewable, which India has done, we're talking about, we've already done about 172 gigawatts of renewable energy. But even if we do 100% of our electricity as renewable, that's electricity is just 20% of your energy. 80% is hard to abate sectors. That's refineries, steel, cement, long distance transport. All this requires you, in all these areas you use fossil fuel, which India imports, $200 billion worth of imports of fossil fuel. Now you need renewable energy to crack water, to produce through electrolyzer green hydrogen. Now, green hydrogen is the ultimate solution to defossilize all this production. Now, green hydrogen in its liquid form is ammonia, which will then be transported to the rest of the world. Now, some countries are going for blue hydrogen, some are going for gray hydrogen, but to get the global size and scale, you need green hydrogen. And therefore, you need to lay down the standards for green hydrogen. The second important thing is that
so is there a work stream?
Yeah. So that's a very important component of G20. The second important point is that some countries, particularly look at the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States. It's the most protectionist piece of literature ever written in the world. It subsidizes America to an extent of $3 per kilogram, even when it produces inefficiently at $7 per kilogram. India produces it at $4.50 per kilogram. So America has to find a way out for its Quad partners or its trusted partners, because if you restrict it to United States, it's not, India's climatically blessed, it's got top-class entrepreneurship. So we need to sort out these issues. And similar is the case with cryptocurrencies.
That's my next topic, on financial sort of regulation, crypto, and just in terms of other cross-border financial market themes. G20 is the ideal forum for this.
Yeah. So a lot of discussion has happened on that. The Financial Stability Board, the IMF, all are working on cryptocurrency regulations, because there are two issues. One is crypto as a digital currency, which I think countries will not accept. But the second is about cryptos as an asset class. As an asset class,
we made some baby steps with the CBDC and Sandbox.
So on the digital currency side, but crypto as an asset class is very powerful digital technology. The blockchain technology is very matured and it's very solid. So crypto as an asset class, there'll have to be some rules and norms, which is what IMF and Financial Stability Board, it can't be a norm for India, it can't be another norm for USA, there can't be a third norm for Dubai. So you need one norm across the world, otherwise there'll be flight of capital, there'll be flight of good entrepreneurs.
There'll be a lot of regulatory arbitrage.
So that's important. And that's what they're working at. G20 is working.
Okay. So we have just 5 minutes left, and I'm going to ask my last question to you on what would you want the legacy, and what would India want to be remembered for its presidency? Just one point. We're having the same conversation in 2nd of December 2023. What would you want to be remembered for?
I think the key is really about transforming the world for flow of finance for both climate action and SDGs. That is critical now for the world, because you will not be able to achieve climate. The countries which need climate action need larger flow of long-term financing, because you don't have hedge instruments. India, for instance, Indian entrepreneurs do not have long-term instruments of 25, 30 years. So you need long-term, that's now, for India, net zero is net positive. But for net, and India has the political and administrative will to achieve it. But Indian entrepreneurs do not have the financial instruments to achieve it. And that is the key.
So that's a great legacy to leave, and sort of our best wishes on that. Any question, one or two questions, and then we stop. I've also got a flight to catch. I'm going to run right after this.
So I thought you'd grill me a hell of a lot already. You want me to get grilled by others also.
But you sort of gave some great answers, and I understand a bit more about what work you are doing. Okay, only two questions. This is one of them.
Hi, Mr. Kant again. So pleasure to obviously hear from you. And I'm one of the few lawyers who actually works in blockchain as well, like we were discussing earlier. With CBDC, with what we're seeing with UPI, with the tech stack now going global, Singapore and various other countries now adopting it. Do you think we're at a strategic advantage with CBDC being piloted on the digital, on the rupee side, right, on the retail side? And is there a case to be made that CBDC can act as a store of value to bring wealth back into India? So think of programming a token on top of CBDC and enabling NRIs to bring back capital, and it can go into something like a GEM, like a government e-marketplace. And so can we look at CBDC to also be an asset class? Like you said, crypto is an asset class. I'm glad that you're...
I think you answered that already.
no, I'm looking at specifically from how can CBDC be programmed and a layer on top of CBDC which can enable inflow of capital into India.
Okay.
Let me just make three quick points on this. One is our UPI model has been very, very efficient. It's top class because, your ability to, the cost of customer acquisition in the United States is $250. In India, it is about $3. So that enables, and that's why companies like Jio and Airtel could do such large acquisition within 90 days. They could do 500 million acquisition within, 5 months, 6 months. That's important. So UPI, you need to push UPI with many other countries. We've done it with Singapore, we've done it with Mauritius, you need to do it with many other countries. The second is, we are at a very advanced stage of CBDC, and CBDC needs to be perfected first in India. And once you've perfected that in India, then you need to accelerate the pace of ensuring that Indians across the world are able to do digital transaction. Once they do it, you'll be able to use their resources into India. That's number two. And number three, I strongly feel that we need to push for digital banks. These banks
Only digital.
Only digital banks now. To say that there'll be some digital units, 75 digital units here, there, is not the answer. The answer is all banks
But
must
the finance minister did announce it in the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, second and the last question, and then we'll stop. We've got 1 minute and 20 seconds left. Keep it
Hello,
short.
sir. So, sir, talk about legacy. Women empowerment is one of the crucial point of G20. So, I want to ask, India's G20 presidency, what will be the legacy for India's women?
In India, there are 1,072 women to 1,000 men now. The latest NFHS survey, there are more women than men. When we started the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, only 17% of the women had bank accounts. Today, 82% of the women have bank accounts. In Mudra lending, 72% of the lending has gone to women entrepreneurs. And therefore, our view is, very strong view of the Prime Minister is that actually learning outcomes, health outcomes, access to education, ensuring that there are, we break this vicious cycle of malnutrition through a strong mother is really the key to prosperity. Not merely for India, but in the global south. And that's why we brought in women, not as a beneficiary, but women as a leader. who can drive change and who can be put into position of power. And unless and until, that will not happen unless and until you don't do transformational things like insurance, like ensuring that there is greater wealth creation for the women than men. And once that starts happening, you'll see the transformation taking place.
Thanks. I am one believe that the future is female. I have 5 granddaughters, and I have great faith in that the world is, I think, going to be ruled by women. So on that happy note, I think we should conclude. I really have a flight to catch. So
But with 5 granddaughters, you're a very lucky man, Mr. Singh.
I am. All Lakshmis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
Amitabh.
much, Mr. Kant and Mr. Shroff, for this great session.